I had a bat in my car because we used to get off late at night. And my manager said, Sean, if you have a bat in your car to protect yourself, you're going to find a reason to use that bat, to use that weapon. You will make up a reason if you have it to use it on someone. So I got rid of that bat. And I live in Baltimore City. And I live in a city where people stand on this floor and make all kinds of wild accusations and talk about how violent Baltimore City is. Well, guess what? Not a delegate from Baltimore City is voting for any of these amendments and making sure that we're safe and making sure that we vote the Firearms Act bill. And I'll also say about this particular amendment, the right to carry. George Zimmerman in Florida had the right to carry. He was patrolling his neighborhood and saw a black boy with a hood on and needed to protect himself from a kid with Skittles and a soda and shot him dead.
Mr. Speaker,
and so the right to carry in Maryland should not be the rule of the day. So I say vote down this amendment because people will find a reason to use it, and there's a lot of Trayvon Martin in the state of Maryland. Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I want to say that we are very ably defended and protected by some fine people in the Maryland State Police. They've done a great job, actually, this whole time in working with us on crowd control and accommodating the people who wanted to come down and weigh in on this issue. I believe that we need to allow the people of Maryland to have the same level of defense, where they able to defend themselves. We talk about situations that may have happened in other states or whatever, but it was interesting, earlier on the floor we were talking about another amendment, we were saying the reason we've done the licensing thing is the way we're going to do it is because all these other states are doing it. So I think, Mr. Speaker, that we should join 38 other states and have it become a right to carry state. We don't trust people in this state when it comes to making choices like what kind of car to drive. And in this case, we don't trust them to defend themselves. And I think it's wrong. This is a good amendment. And the bottom line is, it's pretty typical. This is what people hate about politics. We're being defended by people with guns. Because we know there are dangerous people out there. And I respect the fact that these troopers will put their life on the line if they had to for me. But we don't want to offer that, if you're a regular citizen, the ability to protect their most precious assets with their children. So with that, I support the amendment. I'll be putting a green vote up. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Charles, and the vice chair.
Standing in support of this amendment because I look at all of the effort that you're going to have to go through now to own weapons. And I remember, because I didn't have a right to carry. And I have one for some years. And no, I don't go looking for it. I don't have to go looking for problems, but I know that they exist. And I will say this. As far as crime prevention, there's nothing greater than sending a message out there to the bad guys that your potential victim may also have a weapon. Because in my line of work, what I found out is the majority of these folks are cowards anyway. They prey on individuals who they know cannot fight back. If we're going through all of this effort, all of this work to make sure that we clear the background, that they have gone through, that they're trained, that they have the knowledge of how to use the weapon, the knowledge of the laws for the weapons, then why should they be allowed to carry the weapons? Because as we all know, the bad guys are going to be carried. And now we know after this bill passes, each and every person with their hands on a weapon is a good person. They know how to use the weapon. They qualify. They not only, like I said, know how to use the weapon, but they know the laws behind the weapon. It's more right now than it takes to actually get a wear and carry permit. If you want to stop crime, let the bad guys know you might be armed, because I guarantee you they'll think twice before they come up to your car.
I just want to make two somewhat technical, once at least a technical point. I have actually reviewed this amendment, and I'm glad the delegate indicated that it's supposed to mirror House Bill 48, and we're 38, 38. And for what it's worth, perhaps it is just that the amendment wasn't drafted properly, but it doesn't. And so, in fact, it is not identical to House Bill 38. So that is one problem. Second, in response to the good delegate, the minority leader. Google is a wonderful thing, and so I looked up Dr. John Lott, and some of his research has in fact been discredited. And the National Academy of Sciences panel actually in 2004 reported on several gun control issues and specifically looked at right to carry laws in Chapter 6 and did not endorse Dr. Lott's reports and found that some of his research was not valid. So I would be concerned and suggest that perhaps some of the research about right to carry being important and absolutely being correlated to reduction in crime is not necessarily correct.
Thank you, Speaker. What is the reason that you don't want Marylanders to exercise their full Second Amendment rights? You don't trust them? I mean, nobody stated a reason. You said, we have the votes, we have the power, and we don't like guns. So therefore, you, who do know how to use them, who appreciate them, it's part of your culture and your heritage, you should do as we say, because we know better. The problem is we have two different philosophies. We believe government should leave us alone. That government doesn't belong.
Mr. Speaker, point of order. Is this on the amendment?
It's on the amendment, Mr. Speaker. It has that everything all to do with the right to carry. I've been arguing the right to carry for almost 10 years since I've been down here, and these are arguments I've made on the right to carry at that time. And if I'm going to be limited in what I can say, just let me know what it is, and I'll stick to it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is a difference in philosophy. Big government doesn't want to hear me give this speech. Government doesn't want to hear me talk about freedom and about people's choice and protecting themselves. And that's what it's about to all these people who are here, and all the people who are listening, and all the people in Maryland, the millions of people who said, yes, I want a firearm, and I want to keep and bear that firearm. That's a right that's in the Constitution, and it says government. You may not infringe upon that right. Government doesn't give us that right. It comes from God. It comes from God. Yes, read the Constitution. Read what those who wrote in the Federalist Papers, who wrote the Second Amendment said. And it's of God and God, nature's God, where the right of self-defense comes from. The same as free speech and association and religion. And none of us would infringe on any of those. So the right to keep and bear arms is something that should not be infringed upon. Where, I'm asking you, where? What is the reason? Why do you want to say no to the citizens? Is there one single incident, one, that you can name where a person who had a permit to carry, who had been vetted, has went out and done something wrong in the state of Maryland? I told you earlier that there wasn't a single incident of a person being killed with an assault weapon in Maryland. So I'm asking you, where is the reason? What is the reason that you don't trust the citizens of Maryland? You haven't stated one. You have an irrational fear. You have a real fear, you should have, of the criminals, the people who are doing things wrong. But what has that got to do at all with the citizens who you vetted, who voted for you to be here? It has nothing to do with those who are law-abiding citizens who want the right to, that they are the Constitution, to carry a firearm. And if you listen to the judiciary, the state police come before us, and they say to us, when we ask, what is a good substantial reason? They say every year, delegate, the legislature has to come out and tell us. You failed to tell us. You haven't told us. And so the state police have begged us every year to tell them about a good substantial reason. And so now's your opportunity to say, you know what? We do trust you, citizens of Maryland. We do believe in the Constitution. You know what? Pick up the Constitution and read the Second Amendment. You know, I got a copy here. I'll give it to anybody who hasn't read it. The Constitution is very clear. We have the right to keep and bear arms. And when people sit down and you'll hear them say, well, you know what? You need to accept reasonable restrictions, delegate. You can't go down there on the First Amendment and yell fire in a theater. Well, guess what? There are all kinds of restrictions on the Second Amendment. You can't be an alcoholic, you can't be a drug addict, you can't be a felon, you can't be habitually violent. All of those things you can do and practice your religion. You can do and be a reporter and go out there and print anything you want, but you can't do them if you're trying to exercise your Second Amendment. There are many restrictions on the Second Amendment. And all of those restrictions make sure that the individuals who are exercising that right, the ones who you vetted with all of these restrictions in this huge document, are going to be citizens who jump through every hurdle you can put up. And now you're going to say, well, we still don't trust you? What possible hurdles could you put up that aren't there? Will you ever trust the citizens? Will government ever back down and let the citizens actually exercise the constitutional rights that government is prohibited from interfering with?
The gentleman, I think, comment a little bit here about the third reader debate. If we get back to the amendment, Michelle Perry.
Honor your oath to support the Constitution and support this amendment. Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Baltimore.
Each and every one of our constitutionally protected rights, as my good friend, I believe, recognized towards the end of what he said, none of them is absolute. Justice Scalia said in the Heller decision, the Second Amendment right is not absolute. This bill recognizes that the First Amendment right is not absolute because we restrict access of the press and everyone else to records regarding who has a license, who has a gun. If the First Amendment right of the press was absolute, we couldn't do that. No right is inalienable, and I think the debate is better served, the public is better served, we are all better served. If we recognize that there is a great body of case law of Supreme Court decisions, by conservative justices, by liberal justices, that recognize that there is a balance that is to be struck. First Amendment says Congress shall make no law, but it does. And they are constitutional in certain circumstances. Thank you.
The gentleman from Princeton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What I said before here is it's important for us to recognize history and learn from history. Sometimes we have a marvelous ability to forget about it or to make it up. I grew up in what for folks back here they consider to be the West. I spent a lot of time in the West, and my folks lived in Arizona, which definitely was. So historically, there was a time we had right to wear in this country, in much of it, and that was in the history of the West. And in those days, as anyone who spent time studying either the history or the mythology of Western movies knows, those who were the strongest, meanest, baddest, quickest folks with a gun won the day. And they made the law. Good, bad, it didn't matter any of that, and generally the bad won out over the good. So when our forefathers brought order to that part of our nation, the very first thing that they did is to control access to guns. You've all seen the movies where the sheriff stands up at the town edge saying, "Keep your guns up here, don't bring them into town." There was a reason they did that. They knew that tempers and sentiments and emotions got in the way, and when you put a gun in somebody's hand in that situation, not to mention other things that could come into play like alcohol and interpersonal disputes, you got dead people. You got violence. So the very first thing our forefathers did when they established law and order in that era where wear and carry was the universal rule was to put some limits on the ability to use firearms. That wasn't a constitutional violation then, and nor is it a constitutional violation today. So this is a reasonable sort of measure we have to preserve order in our society. We need to learn from our history. We don't want to go back to the day when everybody carried a gun and the one who is the fastest on the crawl, the quickest with the finger trigger, is the one who can carry the day. That's not what we want. That's not what law is.
Mr. Speaker.
The minority.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, I need to clarify something that was said earlier by the floor leader on this bill. And it's very important, in my opinion. She said to us that the National Academy of Sciences reviewed John Lott's work and found it suspect. I'm paraphrasing, but that's effectively what she said. Here's what she didn't tell you. They found all gun control laws suspect. This is from Robert Levy, chairman of the Cato Institute, who served as co-counsel to plaintiffs in the District of Columbia v. Heller in the successful Supreme Court challenge. And here's what they actually found. Not that Lott was incorrect. They found this, Mr. Speaker. In 2004, the National Academy of Sciences reviewed 253 journal articles, 99 books, 43 government publications, evaluating 80 gun control measures. Researchers could not identify a single regulation that reduced violent crime, suicide, or actions. A year earlier, the Centers for Disease Control reported on ammunition bans, restrictions on acquisition, waiting periods, registration, licensing, child access prevention, and zero tolerance laws. CDC's conclusion, there was no conclusive evidence that the laws reduced gun violence. So what the floor leader didn't tell you was, yeah, they didn't find anything to support John Lott, but they didn't find anything to support any of this other stuff either. None of it. None of the gun control laws were found to be effective, and it's disingenuous to say that they didn't find John Lott's work to be very efficient. They didn't find any of this work to be very efficient because it's not saving lives, because it doesn't work. That's the conclusion of the National Academy of Sciences.
Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Ronald Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to address the gentleman from Baltimore City, who indicated that we have no unalienable rights. We have the right. We have the unalienable right to life, liberty, and property. Life, liberty, and property. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with unalienable rights, and that among these is the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Try to say on the amendment of Michelle Carroll.
Mr. Speaker.
Third grader debate.
Just real quickly, I want to tell all of you, I love you, some more than others, but I love every member in here, at least a little. I especially love my friends from Baltimore City, and my good friend from HGO from Baltimore City who spoke earlier. And I want to assure him and all of you that I wouldn't introduce an amendment unless I were sincere about it, doing the right thing to preserve and protect our citizens, our innocent citizens. So I want to tell you, I have the best of intentions in introducing this amendment. I believe it will make our state safer. I also want to mention that that hearing that went to 4 a.m., I didn't hear a whole lot of people coming down begging us to pass the bill because it was going to make them safer. And lastly, I would just like to point out one technical thing. My good friend who spoke from the committee, the vice chairman, mentioned that this amendment isn't the same. It's substantively the same, word for word. Maybe there's a colon moved around to accommodate Senate Bill 281, but every single word in bold black text is exactly the same. So this amendment has had a full public hearing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
On the amendment, all in favor of the amendment, say aye. Aye. Say nay.
Roll call, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, I would like to explain my vote because as I've listened to the debate, I almost felt like I was reading a different amendment than everyone else in the chamber. And so I read it again and again because if you look at the amendment, the people that we are talking about in this amendment are law enforcement, armed forces, National Guard, some of the most competent and highly trained individuals in our society. And the floor leader, by her very own admission, said that this bill has the same training requirements as states with shell issue. So does it not therefore make sense that we should allow these people to protect themselves? And this notion that somehow we are going to resort to the wild, wild west, or someone is going to use their firearm for a bad purpose just because they have the right to carry, is an insult to the men and women who put their lives on the line to protect us every day. I think this was a very reasonable amendment, and in honor of our law enforcement and our armed forces, our National Guard, our most highly trained and competent people that seek to protect us every day, I vote green.
The clerk will take